The Dutch colonization of Indonesia began in the early 17th century and lasted for more than 300 years, profoundly shaping the country's history, economy, and culture. It was initiated by the establishment of the Dutch East India Company, (VOC), in 1602, which was granted a monopoly on trade with the East Indies by the Dutch government. The VOC's primary interest was to control the spice trade, as valuable commodities like cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were highly sought after in Europe. The company established trade posts and forts in key locations across the archipelago, including Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, which became the center of Dutch activity in the region. The VOC's monopoly allowed it to dominate trade in the region, often through violent means, and exert control over local rulers. During the early period of Dutch colonialism, the VOC ruled much of Indonesia indirectly through local rulers and alliances, often exploiting existing political divisions to maintain control. The Dutch encouraged infighting among the indigenous kingdoms and used diplomacy, military force, and economic incentives to assert their dominance. As the VOC grew increasingly powerful, it expanded its influence over larger parts of the archipelago, including Java, Sumatra, and the Moluccas, Spice Islands. The VOC also established a system of forced labor, extracting resources from the islands for export to Europe. The company's actions often led to the oppression of the local population, including harsh taxation, forced cultivation of crops, especially in Java, and the use of enslaved labor. The decline of the VOC in the late 18th century, due to corruption, mismanagement, and military conflicts, led to the Dutch government assuming direct control over Indonesia in the early 19th century. The Dutch East Indies was formally established as a colony under the rule of the Dutch Crown. The shift to direct rule marked the new phase of colonization, characterized by more systematic and centralized control over the region. The Dutch implemented policies that focus on exploiting the agricultural potential of the archipelago, particularly the production of cash crops like coffee, sugar, and rubber. This system, known as the cultivation system, culture-stelsel, forced Javanese peasants to grow these crops for export, drastically benefiting the Dutch economy while further impoverishing the local population. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw increasing resistance to Dutch colonial rule, both from indigenous groups and intellectuals who were inspired by nationalist ideas. The Dutch responded to uprisings, such as the Podri War and the Java War, with military force, using brutal tactics to suppress revolts. Despite these efforts, resistance continued to grow, and by the early 20th century, the seeds of Indonesian nationalism were planted. Key figures such as Sukarno, who later became Indonesia's first president, and Sultan Syara, a prominent nationalist leader, began to organize movements that sought independence from Dutch rule. The Dutch also began to invest in infrastructure, such as railroads and plantations, to integrate the islands into a single, profitable colonial entity, but the benefits were largely reaped by the Dutch rather than the local population. The Japanese occupation of Indonesia during World War II, 1942 to 1945, temporarily ended Dutch colonial control, but after Japan's defeat, Indonesia declared its independence in 1945, leading to the Indonesian National Revolution. The Dutch initially attempted to reassert their authority, leading to years of conflict between Dutch forces and Indonesian nationalists. The struggle for independence culminated in 1949, when the Dutch officially transferred sovereignty to Indonesia, recognizing its independence after years of resistance. Dutch colonial rule left a lasting impact on Indonesia's political, economic, and cultural landscape. The legacy of colonization, with its exploitation, cultural imposition, and the formation of a modern national identity, continues to shape the dynamics of contemporary Indonesia.